Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Super Blade ball python. The Super Blade contains 2 copies of the codominant blade gene, and when most people think about blade, they're thinking about the blade clown, and I'm pretty sure where the blade actually originated, one of the first reduced pattern clowns was actually called the blade clown, and they found out a little bit later on that they could actually separate the blade from the clown into a separate gene, which is kind of interesting. As a matter of fact, you can actually still find reduced pattern, kind of like a genetic reduced clown version over on Morphmarket. A lot of people say that's like the blade version of the clown without the blade gene mixed in with the clown. So it's kind of interesting. The original blade, they actually separated it from the clown. And if you actually breed 2 blades together, you get the Super Blade. And the thing that I found really interesting is if you actually go over to morphmarket.com and look at the Super Blade combos without the clown, there's not a whole lot that has actually been done with the Super Blade. It's kind of like a hidden gem among ball pythons, which is pretty awesome. And it's really visually dominant. You can actually work other genes into it, and it really holds its pattern. It's kind of an interesting pattern looking just at the Super Blade. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Super Blade ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on morphmarket.com, and I want to start with just 1 copy of the blade gene so you can see what kind of an influence it has. And essentially what the blade does is it reduces the pattern in a lot of combinations. And if you actually take a look at this snake with just 1 copy of the blade gene, essentially what it does is it kind of reduces it into almost tiger stripes in a lot of cases. And you can see on some parts of the snake it has like little Roswell gray alien heads, a little bit reduced, and then in some parts it actually kind of brings it down to these stripes. If you actually take 2 blades and breed them together, 25% of the time you actually get a Super Blade. Take a look at this. This is kind of a unique visual appearance as far as pretty much anything I've ever seen. It's definitely different than like an Enchi or a Super Enchi, and pretty much the only thing I've ever seen that looks similar to this is the KRG, if you're familiar with the KRG, which is the Calabash Reduction gene. And I actually pulled up the KRG. Take a look at this. It almost has the same kind of a striped, almost like tiger stripes with these big spaces between the stripes. So this is the Super Blade. If you actually compare that to the KRG, take a look at this. Almost exactly the same appearance, except this is 1 copy of the KRG gene, and the other one was actually 2 copies of the blade. As a matter of fact, the KRG, I don't think there's actually a Super when it comes to the KRG. I haven't actually seen a Super KRG. And kind of the interesting thing about the KRG is it's not very popular. Both the KRG and the Super Blade haven't really been worked a lot as far as mixing them with other combos. I say both projects would be really interesting to get into because you could produce a whole bunch of really awesome, probably world's first when you're working with both of these genes. And keep in mind the KRG is actually a dominant mutation, so you breed it to something else, half the offspring come out as KRG, and when you're talking about a Super Blade, you actually have to breed 2 blades together or breed a blade to a Super Blade, or you can actually breed 2 Super Blades together and get all Super Blades. It's a little bit trickier to actually hit 2 copies of the Super Blade. I actually pulled up another Super Blade over here. Take a look at this. This is kind of an interesting version of the Super Blade. It looks almost like the KRG, except in this case it actually has kind of this white outline around some of the banding, which is kind of an interesting effect. I haven't really seen anything that even looks close to this. This is kind of a crazy looking snake. And this is just the Super Blade with no other genes in the mix. So take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. This is actually the Super Enchi. So a lot of people, they think, the Super Blade and the Super Enchi, or the Blade and the Enchi, some people can kind of confuse them. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I was convinced that the Blade was just another version of the Enchi until you start looking at them side by side, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of times you can find Super Enchis that have the banded pattern of the Super Blade, but you can't find the Super Blades that have like a crazy pattern like the Super Enchi. So they're definitely different genes, the Blade and the Enchi. So take a look at this. This is actually the clown. The clown is a recessive mutation, and this is essentially where the blade originated. It was a reduced version of clown, and they kept breeding the clown, and it kind of separated out the blade from the clown. But if you actually take the clown and work in the super blade, it gives you a really interesting effect. So if you actually just take a look at the clown by itself, it's usually a really jumbled up pattern, and it usually has this kind of a crazy stripe right down the top, and it usually always has a crazy head stamp on the clown. And when it comes to clowns, I'd say it's if you actually look at the clown by itself, I'd say it's not really that impressive until you start mixing other genes into the clown, and you can get some of the craziest combinations working genes into the clown. I'd say it's probably the king of combos when you're looking at recessive genes. The clown's pretty awesome. So here's what happens if you take clown and you work in the super blade. Take a look at this. This is a really dramatic effect with 2 copies of the blade, and it gives you this line right down the top. It almost looks like, I think they maybe came up with it. It looks like the blade of a knife or something. Just a little strip right down the top. I think that's where it gets its name from. Kind of a crazy effect working it into the clown. And here's another interesting one. I actually pulled this up. This is a Super Blade Enchi clown. So this has 2 copies of the blade and 1 copy of the Enchi, which means that the Enchi and the blade are not compatible. It's not a different version of, the same gene. So sometimes if you actually have the same different versions of the same gene, you can actually make like an allelic complex with 1 copy of each gene. But in this case, you can actually make the Super Blade and the Enchi, so it's like 3 different pattern reducing genes. And I found pretty much across the board that when you work Enchi into clown, essentially what it does is it really gives it more of a like spots or these little splotches down the top of the snake. And a lot of times when you're working in super blade, it really gives you that really strong line. And it looks like if you actually work Enchi in with the super blade, it looks like the Enchi actually trumps the super blade, so we actually get kind of a broken up little spots in the snake. It's kind of interesting. So take a look at this. I want to take a couple genes. There's not a whole lot of examples over here at Morphmarket. Just look at the individual genes and then add super blades so you can see really what the true effect, what the super blade can do on some of these genes. And this is the pastel. When most people think of pastel, they think of a yellow snake. And a lot of times it can be a lot brighter of a yellow, and sometimes it can be a little browned out. It depends on the version of the pastel. And here's what happens if you work super blade into the pastel. Take a look at this. You get like a yellow banded snake, which is pretty awesome that it actually comes out like this. And you can definitely tell in this case, I don't think it's really bringing in a lot of the color from the super blade. It's kind of hard to kind of wrap my head around the super blade because there's not a whole lot of examples over here in Morphmarket. But if you actually would take an Enchi and work it into a lot of combos, a lot of times it'll bring out some orange color along with the Enchi. And it's kind of hard to tell on this one, but as far as what I'm seeing, it doesn't look like there's any color associated with the super blade. It looks like it's pretty much just a pattern mutation. So this is kind of an interesting kind of a combination. This is actually the super pastel, and usually when you work super pastel into combinations, it really scrambles up the pattern, and a lot of times it'll bring out a lot more yellow than just one copy of the pastel, and a lot of times it takes a pretty visually dominant gene to completely, kind of reverse the scrambled up pattern of the super pastel. So take a look at this. You can actually take the super pastel, work in the super blade, and take a look at this. This is really surprising that the super blade even dominates the busy pattern of the super pastel, which is pretty amazing that it can actually do that. And I think there's only maybe like 4 or 5 different combinations over here that contain the super blade and other genes away from the clown. So I think this project is really untapped as far as working this into other combinations. And I can think of a whole bunch of stuff that I could actually do with this kind of a banded pattern, working other genes into the mix to make some really amazing combos. So here's another one that was kind of interesting. This is the last one I want to show you. And this is the lavender albino. There's not a whole lot to actually choose from. And the lavender albino is usually when you work genes into an albino, even a lavender albino, essentially what you get is you get an albino looking snake with kind of a jumbled up pattern depending on which genes you add to the mix. And the lavender albino usually starts out as a regular albino, kind of like this white and yellow. And then as it ages and matures, it kind of transforms the white background into more of a lavender color, which is kind of interesting. And here's what happens if you take the lavender albino and work in the super blade. Take a look at this. It even has an influence on the lavender albino, where you get some of these tiger stripes right down the top of the snake. Makes for a really amazing combination. All right, so it's time for the question of the day. And Louis Edelman asks, can you reuse the hatch rite in your incubation boxes? And that is a very good question. So when you're hatching ball python eggs, essentially what you do is you put the eggs in a hatching box and you pretty much mix like a 50-50 mixture of water and another type of substrate. Some people use vermiculite, some people use perlite, some people use hatch rite. There's a whole bunch of different things you can actually use. And some people, I've actually seen some YouTube videos where they use the same substrate year after year without even cleaning it. It's kind of crazy. And you know, pretty much in those incubation boxes, you're always struggling with mold and you're trying to keep it as pretty much completely sterile as possible. And what I do is I like to use vermiculite and like to just dump it out and use new vermiculite every time. It's really inexpensive. You can actually go to like Home Depot or one of your, you know, like your big hardware stores and buy a whole bag of vermiculite, and it'll last for a long time. You can actually go through quite a bit of vermiculite and it doesn't really cost that much. Now, some people actually use the hatch rite, which is, some people say you can reuse it. Some people actually use like a volcanic rock, which is kind of interesting. You can actually probably take that out and sterilize it and boil it and go through the whole process. But I found it's pretty much easier to use something that's disposable, like a perlite or a vermiculite, and just kind of throw it away. It doesn't really cost that much, and it's really easy just to replace it every year. And I like to go through and use bleach on everything that I can to really bleach it out. I don't use bleach on my vermiculite, but pretty much everything else to try to keep it semi-sterile as much as possible, because it's 2 months of incubation. You kind of want to keep as much, you know, mold and bacteria as you can from getting in that egg box. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.